Bible doesn't provide us with many details about Seth's life. We know that he was born when Adam was 130 years old, and that he lived to be 912 years old. Genesis 5 verse 3 tells us, when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. This description of Seth being in Adam's likeness and image is significant, as it echoes the language used to describe Adam's creation in God's image. It suggests that Seth, unlike Cain, carried forward the divine image that had been imparted to Adam. One of the most important aspects of Seth's legacy is his role in preserving and passing down the knowledge of God. While the Bible doesn't explicitly state this, many scholars believe that it was through Seth's line that the early stories of creation, the fall, and God's promises were preserved and passed down through the generations. This oral tradition would have been crucial in maintaining faith in God during the early years of human history. Seth's significance becomes even clearer when we look at his descendants. Genesis 5 verses 6 to 8 tells us, when Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Enosh, Seth's son, is particularly noteworthy. Genesis 4 verse 26 states, to Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. This verse suggests that it was during Enosh's time that organized worship of God began to take shape. The genealogy that follows Seth is a testament to his importance in the biblical narrative. Through Seth's line, we can trace the ancestry of Noah, and through Noah, the line continues to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and eventually to Jesus Christ himself. This makes Seth a crucial link in the chain of God's redemptive plan for humanity. One of the most intriguing aspects of Seth's story is the contrast between his line and that of Cain. While Cain's descendants are associated with worldly achievements, building cities, developing music and metalworking, Seth's line is characterized by its relationship with God. This dichotomy sets up a theme that runs throughout the Bible, the contrast between worldly pursuits and spiritual faithfulness. The longevity of Seth and his descendants is also worth noting. The Bible records incredibly long lifespans for these early humans, with many living well over 900 years. While this has been a subject of much debate and speculation among scholars, within the context of the biblical narrative, these long lives served a purpose. They allowed for the preservation and transmission of knowledge over many generations, ensuring that the story of God's interactions with humanity would not be lost. Seth's role becomes even more crucial when we consider the state of the world during his time. The murder of Abel by Cain had introduced violence into human society, and as Cain's line grew, so did the prevalence of sin. In this context, Seth and his descendants stood as a counterpoint, a line of people who called on the name of the Lord. They represented the possibility of maintaining a relationship with God even in a world that was becoming increasingly corrupt. The Bible doesn't provide us with any direct quotes from Seth, nor does it recount any specific actions he took. This lack of detailed information about Seth's life has led some to overlook his importance. However, his significance lies not in any great deeds or words, but in his role as a faithful transmitter of God's truth to future generations. In a sense, Seth's story is one of quiet faithfulness, of maintaining belief in God's promises even when the world around was turning away from its Creator. The contrast between Seth's line and Cain's becomes even starker as we move further into Genesis. By the time we reach Noah, a descendant of Seth, the world has become so corrupt that God decides to send the flood. Genesis 6 verses 5 to 8 paints a grim picture. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah, as a descendant of Seth, represents the continuation of the godly line in a world that had largely turned away from God. The fact that God chose Noah and his family to survive the flood and repopulate the earth underscores the importance of Seth's lineage. Through Seth, a remnant of faithful people was preserved, allowing God's plan for humanity to continue despite the widespread corruption that had taken hold. After the flood, it is again through Seth's line, now carried on through Noah's son Shem, that we see God's plan unfold. The genealogy in Genesis 11 traces the line from Shem all the way to Abram, later renamed Abraham, the father of the Israelite nation. This continuity demonstrates how Seth's legacy extended far beyond his own lifetime, shaping the course of biblical history for generations to come. The importance of genealogies in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, cannot be overstated. They serve not just as historical records, but as a way of tracing God's faithfulness through the generations. Seth's place in these genealogies, as the link between Adam and Noah, and indirectly to Abraham and beyond, cements his role as a crucial figure in God's redemptive plan. It's worth noting that Seth's significance extends beyond the Old Testament. In the New Testament, Luke's Gospel includes a genealogy of Jesus that traces his lineage all the way back to Adam. In Luke 3 verse 38, we read, "The son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God." This inclusion of Seth in Jesus' genealogy underscores his importance in the grand narrative of salvation history. The story of Seth also provides us with important theological insights. His birth after the tragedy of Abel's murder demonstrates God's commitment to his creation. Despite the entrance of sin and death into the world, God continued to work through human history, providing a way for people to maintain a relationship with him. Seth's line represents this continued possibility of communion with God, even in a fallen world. Moreover, Seth's story challenges us to reconsider our understanding of significance in God's eyes. While Cain's line is associated with impressive cultural and technological achievements, it's Seth's line, characterized by faith and obedience to God, that is highlighted in the biblical narrative. This suggests that from God's perspective, faithfulness is more valuable than worldly success or innovation. The contrast between Seth's line and Cain's also foreshadows a theme that runs throughout Scripture, the idea of a righteous remnant. Throughout the Old Testament, we see instances where a small group of faithful people are preserved amidst widespread corruption or judgment. Seth and his descendants represent the first instance of this pattern, which culminates in the New Testament with the early Christian church. Another aspect of Seth's story that deserves attention is the way it illustrates the concept of generational faith. While each individual is responsible for their own relationship with God, the Bible often emphasizes the importance of parents passing on their faith to their children. Seth, who presumably learned about God from his parents Adam and Eve, becomes a model of this generational transmission of faith. His descendants, who called on the name of the Lord, likely learned this practice from their forebears. The birth of Seth also provides a powerful message of hope and restoration. After the devastating loss of Abel and the moral fall of Cain, Adam and Eve might have despaired. The birth of Seth, however, represents God's grace in providing a new beginning. This pattern of God bringing hope out of tragedy is repeated throughout the Bible, finding its ultimate expression in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's important to note that while Seth is often overshadowed by more dramatic biblical figures, his role is no less crucial. In fact, his story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people living faithful lives. Seth didn't perform any miracles, lead any great exodus, or receive any dramatic visions, as far as we know from the biblical text. Instead, his contribution was to live faithfully and pass on the knowledge of God to future generations. This serves as an encouragement to all believers that our seemingly small acts of faithfulness can have far-reaching consequences in God's plan. The world of Seth would have been markedly different from the one we know today. As one of the earliest generations of humans, he would have been part of a small, close-knit community. The challenges he faced would have been primarily those of survival and establishing human civilization in its most basic forms. Yet amidst these practical concerns, Seth and his line maintained their focus on God, setting a powerful example for future generations. One question that often arises when discussing Seth is why God chose to continue his plan through Seth rather than through another child of Adam and Eve. While the Bible doesn't provide an explicit answer, we can infer that Seth demonstrated the faith and character that God was looking for. This serves as a reminder that God's choices often confound human expectations, and that he looks at the heart rather than outward appearances or achievements. The story of Seth also provides an interesting perspective on the concept of legacy. While Cain's legacy was one of violence and worldly achievement, Seth's was one of faith and obedience to God. This raises important questions about what kind of legacy we wish to leave behind. Are we more concerned with making a mark on the world, or with faithfully passing on the truth of God to the next generation? It's worth considering how the story of Seth might have been passed down through the generations before it was written down. The oral traditions of ancient cultures were remarkably accurate, with stories and genealogies being carefully preserved and transmitted from one generation to the next. Seth and his descendants would have played a crucial role in ensuring that the stories of creation, the fall, and God's promises were not forgotten. The faithful line of Seth stands in stark contrast to the growing corruption in the world around them. As the descendants of Cain built cities and developed various arts and crafts, they also moved further away from God. The line of Seth, however, maintained their connection with their Creator. This tension between the sons of God, often interpreted as Seth's line, and the daughters of men, associated with the line of Cain, eventually leads to the state of affairs that prompts God to send the flood. Seth's story also touches on the theme of replacement or substitution that runs throughout the Bible. Just as Seth was seen as a replacement for Abel, this idea of substitution finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ, who substitutes himself for sinful humanity on the cross. While the parallel shouldn't be pushed too far, it's an interesting connection that links Seth's story to the broader biblical narrative. The long lifespans recorded for Seth and his descendants have long been a subject of fascination and debate. While some interpret these ages literally, others see them as symbolic or as reflecting a different way of counting years. Regardless of how we understand these numbers, they serve to emphasize the direct connection between these early generations and Adam, who had walked with God in the Garden of Eden. This proximity to the original creation and the fall would have given Seth and his immediate descendants a unique perspective on humanity's relationship with God,